Two explorers of the Great Northwest, Sir Alexander Mackenzie and Captain James Cook. A 15-year-old boy, Alexander Mackenzie, was strolling alongside the docks of Montreal, Canada, on a spring afternoon in 1779. He was a refugee from the Revolutionary War in America. During the 3 months since his arrival in Canada, Alex had spent a good many hours at the docks. They fascinated him. A shipment of furs was being loaded for England. Mink, marten, muskrat, fox, raccoon, and beaver. Alex knew the names of all the animal skins by now. Farther along the harbour, he stopped to look at the colourful picture made by the fur traders' men. French and British, as they piled their canoes high with guns and supplies and gifts for Indian trappers. In Canada, these men were called voyageurs, the French word for travellers. A voyageur's life must be the most thrilling in all the world, he thought to himself. He would love to go sailing along those rivers and lakes, exploring the unknown, buying skins from the Indians. The excuses he gave his friends for his long absences at the harbour was that he had to find out when the boat would arrive from America. That was to bring his Aunt Sib and Aunt Muriel. But he didn't bother to ask any more. Some sailor, sea captain, or ship clerk would let him know. He had talked to everyone around the harbour about those two aunts. They had taken the place of his mother, who had died in Scotland so many years ago that he could hardly remember her. They had come to America to keep house for his father, but now his father was dead too. He had been killed fighting against the American Revolutionary Army. It seemed to Alex that the three who were left, he and his aunts, ought to stay together, but the aunts thought otherwise. New York State, where they were living, was no place just now. They said for the son of a British officer, the best place for Alex was across the border, and off he had gone as soon as a responsible person was found to take charge of him. Aunt Sib promised they would follow as soon as possible. When Alex objected to leaving them behind, she put on her severe expression. "Are you in charge of us, or are we of you? Now you be off before I take a cane to your legs," she said. That was 3 months ago now. Now Alex, walking from his daydream on the docks, turned abruptly in the direction of home. Accidentally, he stepped on the toes of a tall, proud man behind him. "You young scoundrel," the man replied angrily. "Have you no manners? Why don't you look where you are going?" "I'm sorry I trod on your toes," Alex began apologising, but then threw back his dark curly head in resentment. The man had raised his whip and was striking him over the shoulders with it, shouting at him, "Don't give me any of your back talk, young fellow." "I said I was sorry," Alex shouted back, "and I am no scoundrel." He seized the whip, threw it on the ground, and ran as fast as his legs would carry him. If Alex Mackenzie had kept on running, his great chance might never have come to him. But he didn't. He stopped in a doorway and peeped to see if he was being followed. He was, but not by the man who had beaten him. A shorter, less important-looking man, who wore the clothes of a working man, called out to him, "Stop! Hey, young Alexander Mackenzie, aren't you? I want to talk to you." The boy's dark, shining eyes met the man's with defiance. He was prepared to stick up for himself if he was going to be attacked again, but the man's eyes had a kindly twinkle in them. "I'm John Gregory," he said. "My boy, I've never before seen anyone, man or boy, stand up to Simon McTavish the way you did. Walk along with me. I have something particular to say to you." Now, Simon McTavish was the richest and most powerful fur trader in all Canada. He was greedy and wanted to keep all the fur trade to himself, and that meant ruin for the small traders. John Gregory was one of these small traders. "I could do with a young clerk like you in my office," Gregory told Alex after a while. The boy's heart beat fast as he agreed to be in the office of his new friend the next morning. It was a proud and happy day for him when his two beloved aunts arrived and he was able to tell them he was earning his own living. As time went on, Alex learned more and more about the business of fur trading, but he never ceased to dream of the adventurous life of a voyager. That was the life for him. He didn't want to work in an office all his life again. Again, something happened to give him the very chance he wished for. One wintry evening, he sat at supper with his aunts. A message was brought to him. Meet me at the tavern at 8 o'clock tonight, it reads, and tell no one. It was signed Charles Doucet. Who's it from? Aunt Sib asked suspiciously. Oh, a friend. That's no answer. Just one of the voyagers, Alex explained airily. I've got to meet him tonight. He's going up river pretty soon, and I suppose he wants to talk to me about provisions. Aunt Sib snorted, but Aunt Muriel grew pink with pride because the boy sounded so manly. Charles Doucet, who had signed the note, was a humble man, but because he was a real voyager, Alex felt flattered by having the secret rendezvous with him. When he reached the tavern, he tried to behave like a man. He wasn't going to be scared by the bright lights, the scurry of waiters carrying trays, and the clamour of loud talk and laughter, the twinkling of glasses. All the same, it was quite a relief to see Doucet beckoning him into a quiet corner. It is always so noisy, he asked. Well, perhaps tonight's a bit special, Doucet replied. He lowered his voice to call Alex's attention to some gentlemen who had just entered. Those three, the landlords bowing to as if they were great lords. Why, the tall one's McTavish, Alex exclaimed. Shh, yes. And his two new partners, they're going upstairs. Too good to dine with us common people. Not that. They're plotting something and I don't want any big ears taking it all in. Doucet chuckled and went on. They're too late, though. I know all about their scheming, and Mr. Gregory ought to know. That's why I ask you to meet me, so that I can tell you and you can tell him he trusts you. Alex listened with bated breath while Doucet outlined McTavish's plan of action. Upstairs, the old Scotsman and his companions were signing papers that named them partners in the Northwest Company. This new company was going to decide who could trade in furs and who could not, and all small traders were to be kept out, by fair means or foul. Already hundreds of voyagers were preparing to start for the Terrier, and more were to follow. Supplies were being ordered on a scale unheard of in the history of the trade. Such news could not wait. Alex ran all the way to John Gregory's little cabin and knocked on the door. The trader woke up and came shivering in his nightclothes to see who could be wanting him at such an hour. Alex poured out his story and then asked breathlessly, What are we going to do about it? Nothing tonight, John Gregory replied, smiling at his young clerk's enthusiasm. I'm going back to bed. We'll talk about all this tomorrow. Good night. Next morning, Gregory told him, We will form our own company. I'll get some of my friends among the small traders to come in with me. It's going to mean a long fight. And to deal with the Indians, I want a man I can trust beyond the shadow of a doubt. I can think of no better man for the job than you, Alex Mackenzie. Alex didn't hear the rest of what his employer was saying. I shall be a voyager, he kept saying to himself, and his heart sang for joy. He felt he ought to say something, so he asked, What are you going to call your new company, sir? Call it anything you like, the XY Company, perhaps, but start immediately for Detroit. Take all the canoes you can, load and all the beads and blankets and knives and trinkets you can get a hold of for the Indians. Take clerics, peddlers, guides, but start at once. Detroit, of course, belonged to the United States by this time, because the American revolutionists had won the war, but the United States government had not had time to claim it, and Canadians could still move in and act as if they owned it and all the surrounding country. The new XY company ran into many difficulties, but Alex knew how to handle them. He was happier than he had ever been in his life. He learned to understand and love the Indians. A few weeks after he had established camp in Detroit, the Indians sold him his first 6 huge bales of fur, and from then on, the trade of the new company increased rapidly. His men told stories of how he won the confidence of the Indians. One of them was about an old Indian chief who was very ill with fever. I have some white powder that will make him better, said one of the clerics. No, no, screamed the Indian. I will not take your powder. The white man smiled. You think I am offering you poison. See, I myself will take some to prove it is harmless. He swallowed a dose of the powder. Still the Indian refused to touch it. Alex had been watching closely by. He drew near, sat down by the sick man's couch, and stroked the long black hair from his forehead. Where are your friends? He said in a gentle voice. We are unhappy to see you sick. You will be doing us great honour if you take this powder we are offering you. To the astonishment of the other white men, the old chief swallowed the powder at once. To honour you, he said solemnly, I will take the magic powder if it kills me. John Gregory thought so well of Alex's work in and around Detroit that he made him a partner at the end of his first year. He had heard how, time after time, the young man had foiled the Northwest Company's attempt to bribe his men and turn the Indians against him. The bitter war between the two companies continued for many years, and McTavish's men and Alex's often came to blows. Much of his time had to be spent in the frozen Northwest. No white man had penetrated farther into Canada at that time than to the shores of Lake Athabasca and the Great Slave Lake. A little more than halfway across the continent beyond that was the wilderness, and it was the shores of Lake Athabasca that Alex spent his next long hard winter. There was little to do until the ice broke up and the Indians could come down the river with the furs to the trading settlements. Meanwhile, Alex had time to dream and to listen to the Indian tales of the Rocky Mountains and what they called the Great Stinking Water beyond them. That must be the Pacific, he thought, and the great rivers of Canada must flow west into it. A man with strength and endurance could follow the rivers to see where they came out, and he read all the books he could get that told how great explorers had devoted their lives to discovering new lands. One night he closed the book he had been reading by the fire. He got up and began walking restlessly up and down the hut he shared with some of his men. Amazing, he exclaimed. One of the greatest navigators the world has ever known. Who, Columbus? Asked a man in the corner sleepily. No, I was thinking of Captain Cook, replied Alex. Do you know he ran away to sea at 14? He had no education but what he taught himself, worked for nothing for 4 years, became an able seaman. Then just when he got to be the first mate, he gave it all up to join the Royal Navy because his country was at war and needed him. At the end of the war, he started all over again at the bottom of the ladder. Not so fast, Roderick Mackenzie interrupted. He was Alex's cousin and a clerk in the XY Company. You forget that while he was in the Royal Navy, he was master of the King's ship of the line, Pembroke. You tell it then, Rory, if you know so much about it. And the Pembroke took part in the Battle of the Quebec in 1759. Master James Cook played quite a part in winning the battle. You're right, he was a fine navigator. He made it possible for the troops to land because he charted a passage through that dangerous channel below Quebec. Then he lost his job, Alex said with some bitterness. A man like Cook is never out of a job long, Rory went on. Every nation that has any ships today is sending them out to explore strange waters and discover new lands. And it was the same when Cook was a young man. 20 or 30 years ago, he was needed right enough. And soon after the war, he was sailing the southern seas in search of new continents between Australia and the Americas. And it didn't exist. That's right. It was useful to know. Anyway, he gazed polar ice many a time searching for it, and he found New Zealand and Australia, said Alex. Or rather rediscovered them. I believe some Dutch navigator or other was the first to land in Australia a few centuries ago. Yes, but Cook made maps of the coasts and charted the seas wherever he went. Then, of course, he really was the first white man to discover the Sandwich Islands, otherwise known as Hawaii, Terra del Fuego, the Friendly Islands, and America. Alex got no further for the peals of laughter that greeted this remark. When he could be heard again, he went on to explain that he meant the west coast of America. His job was to find a passage across the North American continent. We know he landed and saw great forests and unbroken chain of high mountain, but he sailed on right around the northwest tip of the continent without finding a way through. For a good reason, smiled Rory. There is none. Alex stared into the fire and shook his head thoughtfully. I wonder. There was a moment's silence, then a young clerk, who had been trying to get up courage to ask a question, suddenly blurted it out. Is it true the Hawaiians made a god out of this Captain Cook, then killed him? I wouldn't put it like that exactly, replied Rory. A quarrel broke out between the natives and the sailors about some knives that were stolen from the ship. A couple of shots were fired, and this scared the natives. Poor Cook got stabbed in the back during the excitement. The chief was quite unhappy about it. He gave his friend a magnificent funeral service and sent his body to the ship with great ceremony. Not long after this talk about Captain Cook, Alex persuaded John Gregory to give him a few months' leave so that he could explore the Peace River that flowed out of the Great Slave Lake. Gregory did not stand in his way, and in June 1789, Alex took 4 canoes and started up the river. 102 days later, he was back, telling Rory all about it. So much for my wonderful Peace River, he said. Gloomy, I found an ocean, all right, but it turned out to be not the Pacific, but the Arctic. You think the expedition amounted to nothing then? Rory asked with a laugh. Why? Alex, think what you have done. You have gained 3,000 miles from the wilderness, and no serious accident. Isn't that a kind of record? You explored the whole of the Peace River, next in size to the Mississippi. Instead of calling it the River of Disappointment, I'd call it the Mackenzie River. Rory was the only encouraging friend Alex had. McTavish, of course, thought exploring a waste of time, but even John Gregory discouraged any further effort to find a way to the Pacific. And that hurt Alex. He decided to go to England and study navigation and astronomy and anything else that would give him more knowledge to help him conquer the wilderness. He spent a good part of the year 1792 studying in England. When he returned to Canada, he found that Rory had built a new fort on the mighty Peace River and made friends with the local Indians. That was a great help, for he was able to spend the winter there preparing for his new expedition. Another Scot, Alexander Mackay, went with him, and the faithful Doucette and several others. The 25-foot canoe containing 10 young men and Alex's dog, Eskimo, who had refused to be left behind, was launched from the fort on May the 9th, 1793. Whenever they came to a place where the river forked, Alex had to guess or consult Indians who lived there about which fork to take. His own Indian guides often disagreed with the strange Indians. They called Alex Kitchi Okama, which means he who will travel fast. And they said, Kitchiokama is leading us to the land of the evil spirit, the Machi Manitou. When he insisted upon taking the advice he thought wisest, sometimes the fork he took led the little party into swift rocky streams, full of cataracts, and the boat had to be unloaded, carried over the cataracts, then reloaded many times. But though navigation was difficult, and though the canoe had to be patched up every other day, the route Alex took proved to be the right one. On the afternoon of May the 17th, he thought he could make out a white line against the sky, and he called to the others to look. The Rocky Mountains, they all cried, dancing with joy. Soon we shall cross them. Only the Indians didn't want to cross the Rockies. They said, we have seen the great Rockies. Only the Indians didn't want to cross the Rockies. They said, we have seen the great mountains. Now the good, kind Kitchiokama will let us turn back and go home. They had had enough. Alex had to be patient. We now have a chance of really finding the big water, he told them. This is what we went through so much danger and endured so many hardships for, isn't it? And gradually he persuaded them to go. During the next 2 months and more, they met with even worse mishaps. Storms and rushing waters swept all their supplies away. Unfriendly Indians threatened to kill them. Starvation faced them at the last. Yet the Indian guides and paddlers never complained again. They remained loyal and went doggedly on. It was on a warm, sunny morning, the 20th of July, 1793, that the sturdy but battered canoe at last came out into a little bay of the Pacific Ocean. The Indians they met near the coast treated them with great friendliness. One day a chief showed Alex a blue cloth coat with brass buttons and some European cooking pans. These, he explained, were gifts 10 winters ago from a white man like you, Captain Cook. Alex could hardly speak. He was so overcome by this proof that the great navigator had really landed on the west coast of America and had actually stood on the same spot he was standing on 10 years before. The full story of Alexander Mackenzie's expedition was written by himself a few years after his return to civilization. The book brought him great fame, and the King of England made him a knight. From being a poor 15-year-old clerk in John Gregory's office, the boy Alex, while still in the prime of his life, had become Sir Alexander Mackenzie, the famous Canadian discoverer of the road to the Pacific.